We're all familiar with the clean, family-friendly image that Disney has cultivated over its 100-year existence. When sitting cross-legged on the carpet in front of my CRT TV, waiting for the tape inside those massive clamshell cases to start up, I was bombarded with advertisements for future projects, new theme park attractions, television series, and whatever else the House of Mouse could use to grab my adolescent attention and drain my parents' wallets, all narrated by that familiar, friendly voice with child actors looking wide-eyed and the phrase "fun for the whole family" repeated endlessly. And for the most part, the films meet that set expectation, no doubt under the strict supervision of the studio. We've got fairy tales, princes, princesses, good moral lessons, love winning in the end, and all of it marketed in a way that frankly gave a lot of people an improper view of animation as a medium only intended to be consumed by children. Insert my previous video here. But even in the most timeless, inoffensive examples of these films, there are some undeniably nasty villains who threaten our heroes, and while their character designs, actions, writing, and voices may vary in how they personally affect us, the way that they meet their ends can and has caused trauma. These challenges have to be overcome, and while you can sometimes just trap, arrest, humiliate, or simply defeat some bad guys via non-lethal means, it's not always that easy. Those monsters that will stop at nothing to kill our protagonists are playing a pretty dangerous game, and eventually you've gotta get what's coming to you. We all know these moments by heart. There are compilations, discussions, and rankings built around these scenarios because at their very best, they really work. Whether they shock, disturb, or even weirdly satisfy, it's always a hell of a moment when Disney villains die. So I've been working on a video where I rank all the theatrically released animated Disney films, and while going through the studio's entire filmography, I've been keeping track of how all the villains meet their demise. Looking at my notes here, I've listed about 30 or so deaths that I can remember, and I'm sure there's an official wiki somewhere that includes every single one, but the goal here isn't to go through them all, and there are a few standout elements that I want to take a look at here specifically. I want to examine how Disney approaches death for villainous characters, especially in relation to the heroic characters. If I remember correctly, there was a video by Lindsay Ellis a while back where she looked into Disney's relationship with death and how good characters don't die violently, get a lot of time to say goodbye, sacrifice themselves for a greater good, or just die off screen of old age. Goodness is an inherent value to the stories that the Walt Disney Company wants to tell, so even death has an air of goodness around it for our protagonists. They have to, especially in recent years, walk this fine line where the right choices must always be made by the heroes, treating everyone as worth saving, but that same good also has to triumph over evil. Because of this, I've always found it fascinating to observe the hand that the hero has in the fates of these villains in these movies. Whether they're directly responsible for it or are completely separate, it varies greatly, and you can see Disney on several occasions firmly plant itself in the heroes are not directly responsible camp by discussing the most common cause of Disney bad guy death: falling. Gravity is a force of nature, something that heroes have no direct control over. Therefore, they cannot claim any responsibility for the villain toppling over into the abyss. It beautifully separates them from any kind of violence and even lets the god of these universes actively take a role in vanquishing the evil from them simply based upon their actions. Bad things will happen to bad people in Disney's world. They deserve it, so fate makes it so. The very first Disney villain death to ever occur is the evil queen from Snow White. And while they even add a big boulder falling on top of her for good measure, it's the massive fall that did her in. And why did she fall? Well, she was attempting to crush the dwarves with a big rock, and then a fateful lightning strike crumpled the very cliff from beneath her. There it is, the god of the Disney universe keeping our heroes' hands clean for the very first time, but definitely not the last. Not only is falling the most common villain death for Disney, but it might be the most common death in all of media. Dramatic stakes only rise, and some writers take that very literally by having the climaxes of their stories take place atop high structures like mountains, cliffsides, towers, or even in flight. It's easy to watch the animation of the villain falling and say that gravity was the cause of death, but it's important to rewind the tape a little bit and see why they actually fell to begin with. Again, I do this because I like to see cases where the filmmakers deviate a little bit from Disney's squeaky clean dynamic, and the hero actually has a hand in the demise of the villain, or somewhat more interestingly, if the fall is caused by some major character flaw within the villain themselves. Because something that's going to be consistent in this video is that the best deaths earn their flowers by being the most thematically appropriate for the story. The perfect end, as it were. Going a little bit in order here from the Evil Queen, the next antagonist to fall is the bear from The Fox and the Hound. While he's definitely more of a third act obstacle than a real villain, he does serve a purpose within the narrative of these characters standing up for one another. The bear falls because of Todd saving Copper's life. It's a moment that reminds the audience of their bond and what they're willing to do to save one another, which of course makes this moment that much more powerful. Ratigan, one of the best villains ever that's way too underrated in my opinion, tumbles off of Big Ben. A great setting for a climax and a perfect end for his character, because what causes him to fall is actually his gloating and his ego. He's too distracted by celebrating his perceived defeat of Basil that he doesn't realize the clock is about to strike. He's outsmarted once again. Basil may not have anything to do with Big Ben going off, but he did know it was about to happen, and something else I love about Ratigan, even plummeting to his death, he tries to take Basil with him, something unique that we don't actually see in Disney movies at all. Similarly to Ratigan, McLeach from Rescuers Down Under tumbles over a waterfall, partly due to his ego, gloating to a bunch of crocodiles that he bested them, only to look over his shoulder and see the waterfall way too late. I say partly here because our protagonist actually did knock McLeach straight into the water here, making him the first hero in this video to straight up cause our villain's death. Certainly not the last we're going to talk about, nor the first in Disney history to do so, but it is worth mentioning. We all know about Gaston's death and why it's one of the very best from a thematic and storytelling standpoint. His fall is symbolic in more ways than one. The entire film, Gaston has been lifted up by the people he has managed to convince to believe in him. His fear-mongering and spouting of propaganda against the beast caused him to march on the castle in full confidence, but when it was finally time to face the beast, he did it alone. There was nobody left to bolster his ego, and there's a very purposeful shot of Belle grabbing the beast before he can fall from the castle, saving him. Gaston has nobody to save him. And yes, there's the skulls in the eyes. It's classic. Now, I don't want to go exactly in chronological order for this video. I mean, we've got to save the best for last, after all. And in that spirit, I think we should take a look at the second most common cause of Disney villain death. F***ing exploding. Yeah, weirdly enough, there's a good amount of Disney bad guys that just blow up, and weirder still, I think the reason that this one is popular is because it's also kind of clean, at least if you filter an explosion through the lens of Disney. You don't have to show any viscera or guts flying everywhere, just show the villain react and then a fireball. There you go. What differentiates these examples are, of course, the mechanisms of their explosions. Sykes from Oliver & Company may be better classified as being hit by a train, but the car blowing up ties it all together. It's quick, violent, and has a great close-up on the eyes before the train f***ing obliterates him. This is the baseline for our purposes here. Shan Yu, despite how lame he is as a villain, gets taken out directly by the hero like the rest of his army in Mulan. Mulan and Mushu both work together to blow his ass up with a firework. While I don't love Shan Yu, I do love what his defeat means for Mulan. It shows her tenacity and how she comes up with her own solutions to rise above. His explosive end highlights her cleverness and creativity. Something both Sykes and Shan Yu have in common is I don't really care for them as villains all that much. I wouldn't rank them all that high, but their defeats are memorable. In the case of Sykes, it might be the most memorable thing about him. It isn't just the explosion, it's the way that it happens. There's an impact, a moment of realization for the character, a nice drawn out look at the carnage. The reason I'm pointing all of this out is to illustrate that there is a right way to do an explosion death and a very, very wrong way. Take Lightyear, for example. Does anyone remember Lightyear? Anyone at all? Well, Zurg/future old Buzz gets blown up by the younger Buzz, and while I do appreciate that Buzz actually does this himself, the pacing is way too fast, and kind of like the movie itself, there's just no impact. It comes off as unintentionally comedic with no real sense of payoff.
Not today, Zurg!
If they had done something unique here, or at the very least paced it a little differently, this could have been a memorable scene that elevated this crappy villain like the last two I talked about. This is why this topic is worth talking about. While not every single villain here is created equal in terms of writing, design, characterization, or menace, there's still that opportunity to elevate them by how you choose to kill them off. Some more violently than others. And talking about bad guys blowing up is getting us dangerously close to those more violent deaths in the Disney catalog, as well as inching us closer to scenarios where the hero has to do the dirty work themselves. When the villain shrinks down to nothing or is engulfed in a large fireball, it's easy for the filmmakers to spare the audience all of the grisly details, but they can't all have the same fate, nor can they all be as clean. Something I've observed while looking at all of these scenes is the more violent the death, the less human the villain. Take, for example, the electrocution of both of these dogs from Oliver and Company. For lack of a better term, it's shocking. I'm so sorry. But if that wasn't bad enough, Flotsam and Jetsam are reduced to eyeballs, which is very gruesome for a studio that usually likes to hide the bodies, as it were. I think the next two examples both are very similar, but also highlight my point pretty well. That point being that if we remove the humanity from these characters, it's easier for the younger audience to accept a more brutal end for them. Maleficent and Ursula are both humanoid in design, have plenty of screen time, have big personalities, and interestingly enough, both get stabbed to death by a prince. Of course, you can't stab a Disney villain without first transforming them into a giant monster. Maleficent's dragon form even gets a little bit of rare Disney blood thrown in. I usually prefer Ursula's fate just a little more because it seems way more painful. You see the ship coming out the other end in this wide shot, and they linger on her dying much longer. Of course, you can get away with a bit more brutality than usual in these films if you imply more than you actually show, and we'll see examples of that here in a moment. But if I had to pick what I believe to be the most violent death in Disney history, one that doesn't cut away and shows every gruesome detail, I'd go with what happens to the Horned King in the Black Cauldron. Again, something they'd never get away with if this guy wasn't already basically a zombie. He gets dragged into the titular cauldron by some mysterious magical power. A power so strong that it literally rips him apart. His flesh is torn from his body until only his skeleton remains, and while there's no blood or guts here, this is about as close as you'll get for something that was marketed towards kids. So, something that I always thought was a bit weird was how in movies overall, by the way, not just Disney, protagonists occasionally show concern for or even try to help an antagonist as they're dying, an antagonist that has done nothing but horrible things to them the entire film. Sometimes they just don't deserve your help, dude. For instance, Mother Gothel's defeat is a fantastic scene. I love everything about it. The way the lighting is darker, the way that Flynn Rider gives up his own life just so Gothel can't use Rapunzel for her gift again, the horrified realization of what's going to happen to her youth as the golden hair turns brown, the simulated dolly zoom here. It's all great, except for this one weird shot of Rapunzel reaching for her abusive fake mother for some reason. Like, you can make the argument that she's lived with her for nearly her entire life and does in some way still see her as her mother, but I don't know, just before this scene she made it pretty clear that she was done with her and would keep fighting her unless Gothel allowed her to heal Eugene. Again, I think this just comes down to Disney doing their best to make Rapunzel as pure as possible. To an extent, I get it, but I'm on the side of Pascal here. F that bitch. A minor nitpick, but still an excellent death scene. One that I don't really categorize as a fall, by the way, since she was going to turn to dust anyway. Lastly, I really love this wide shot of her falling from the tower. Phenomenal stuff. I will say though, I'm kind of annoyed that we don't get to see too many ladies take out the bad guys. We got Mulan, which was awesome, but Ariel, Rapunzel, Aurora, they all had to be rescued by their prince, and while I'm not shitting on these guys being badasses or anything, I do like to see when the Disney princess just straight up kills a guy. While we may not see it that often, it's a big deal when we do, and even if Disney starts doing this sort of thing a lot more, I don't think we're ever gonna get better than Tiana getting Dr. Facilier dragged to literal hell. Now, this is what I like to see. Tiana doesn't fall for his manipulation, outsmarts him, gets a great one-liner in, and causes what is conceptually probably the most horrifying fate in all of the Disney canon. A lot of what makes this work is how drawn out it is, how it turns the tables on Facilier, using the very imagery that he used to spread so much terror before to let him know that his time is up. They brilliantly reincorporate the music from his villain song here, reminding him that all the power that he had was merely borrowed, and as a final insult, the former friends on the other side use his shadow, the very thing he has used for his benefit the entire film, to drag him away. Keith David's vocal performance is great, the music is great, the animation is spectacular, it's one of the best of all time, easily. That's how you do it. And yeah, I think that's the perfect segue into discussing what I think are the very best of the best. And while I've spent some time in this video going over some of the causes of death, what ultimately makes these work is both a combination of the memorable gruesomeness and how well that demise suits the character. How it feels like a conclusion to the arcs they've been on, the very fate sealed by their devious actions, and in the case of Ernesto de la Cruz, foreshadowed as a sort of foregone conclusion. Like the very spiritual forces that govern the reality of Coco punished him in both life and afterlife for stealing Hector's music. The first death making him a tragic legend, and the next sealing his fate as a fraud for all eternity. It's poetic, it's dark, and it's so insanely satisfying. No! Speaking of satisfying, it's always great to see when the very device that a villain uses to take power is what does them in. This is the case for King Candy, who is actually the character Turbo who took over another game, infecting it and changing it like a virus. Similarly to how he transformed into King Candy, he later becomes a Cybug, intent on using his new abilities to take over even more games. The irony of his death being that, for the first time, he's forced to play by the rules of the game. Even with all of his confidence, this arrogance that comes from being on top for so long, he finally ran into something that he couldn't just reprogram or manipulate. Similarly to the rules that force Vanellope to remain in Sugar Rush, Turbo succumbs to the code that forces the Cybugs into the light. While Ralph, who's the villain of his game, is content with sacrificing himself to save Sugar Rush, Turbo, the former hero of his game, goes out like the bad guy he truly was all along.
Go into the light!
This next one is interesting because it has the same imagery that one would associate with the classic Falling, but it's actually the complete opposite of Falling. Well, maybe it's not. In a way, the gravity is the cause of death here, or the lack of it. Mr. Scroo from Treasure Planet is a real nasty character. He triggers my arachnophobia a little bit, and unlike our primary antagonist, Silver doesn't have any real redeeming qualities. He hated Jim from the beginning and really hated Mr. Arrow, so much so that he went against Silver's wishes to lay low and directly caused Mr. Arrow to fall into a black hole. That's why it's just so damn beautiful when in his final confrontation with Jim, he tries the exact same trick he pulled with Mr. Arrow, only for Jim to outsmart him and send him floating off into the void of space. His reaction directly mirroring the horrified reaction of the man he sent to his death before. Out of all the Disney villain deaths, or Disney villains in general, I don't see Scroo talked about enough. He's an effective secondary antagonist with one hell of a send-off. One of the more rare fates to befall Disney bad guys is also one of the more just awful to think about, and that's being eaten alive. It's a cruel, nasty way to go, and it's reserved for, rightfully, the cruelest and nastiest bad guys Disney has to offer. When it comes to the actual characters of A Bug's Life, I think the villain might be the most interesting. The only character I really had a strong interest in. Hopper is a real rotten piece of shit, and very intentionally so, reminds me of a lot of very powerful people in real life today. He's a massive, intimidating figure in this tiny world, scaring these ants into serving him and the rest of the grasshoppers, utilizing their fear to get whatever he wants, but he himself is afraid. We get to know his two greatest fears throughout the story. Firstly, he's afraid of the very ants that he oppresses, specifically their numbers and how easily they could overwhelm the grasshoppers if they realized just how much power they have when they band together. These are poignant themes, and the scene where the ants realize this is the very best scene in the entire movie. His other greatest fear? Birds, and after the ants use that against him with a giant fake bird, Hopper finds himself face to face with a very real one, and Hopper is brutally reminded of a law of nature that he can't exploit. There's always someone bigger than you, and you should probably stick to picking on people your own size. It's not only appropriately dark, but also humiliating. This big, scary bug who commanded so much attention with his very presence is reduced to nothing but food for baby birds. There's only one other Disney villain who has the displeasure of being eaten alive, and the scene is even better than Hopper's. It makes sense that a top-tier Disney villain in a top-tier Disney movie would get a top-tier death scene. Scar's death is perfect because of the way it falls entirely onto his own shoulders. This is a character who, up to this point, has been able to talk himself out of nearly every situation, to manipulate himself into power, force Simba into hiding, and most importantly, take command of the hyenas. The entire plot of this film revolves around Scar's machinations, his ability to use anyone and everyone to get what he wants. But the one flaw in his plan just happens to be his propensity to throw those loyal to him under the bus to save his own hide. He narrowly escapes the wrath of Simba by appealing to his good nature, his position as his uncle, pulling the family card, but he slipped up when he told him that it was entirely the hyena's fault. There's a message here about the manipulation of the desperate, the hungry. Eventually, when they find out that you never really had their best interest in mind to begin with, you start to look pretty tasty yourself. This is the downfall of a king who treats his subjects like garbage, and the animation here gorgeously shifts with Scar's perspective. The way the hungry hyenas warp in the heat, the close-up on Scar's eyes as he realizes he's doomed, now feeling the very same way his brother felt when he betrayed him. And to top it all off, his shadow growing on the side of Pride Rock only to be devoured. That's how you kill such a fantastic villain.
Go!
I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on Froolo, mainly because I've talked this guy up like crazy on this channel before. See this video if you want more detail on him. In short, he's my favorite Disney villain ever with the best song ever, and while he may not have my favorite death of all time, he has the perfect one for his character. There's really no falling type death as symbolic as this one. In the other films, it doesn't really matter a whole lot what the villain topples from the top of. Big Ben, a waterfall, a cliffside, a floating house, they're all fun locations, but none of them represent what the lake of burning fire beneath the Notre Dame Cathedral is meant to. Do the math. I've said it all before and I'll say it again. This is as great as villainous writing ever got for Disney, and I would talk about this guy for an hour if I hadn't already. These last three take the top spots because I feel they do something unique in some fashion. Whether it's a spin on an already used up concept, something entirely unique, or in the case of my boy Syndrome, a death so hilariously foreshadowed that I don't think that my commentary would add anything at all. Edna Mode said it all better than I ever could.
No kicks!
Not only do I agree with the sentiment that Atlantis: The Lost Empire is one of the most underappreciated films from the House of Mouse, I tend to argue that Rourke is among their most underrated bad guys. For me, he perfectly represents a simple concept done well. He's in it for the money and doesn't care what he has to do to get it. Where this could be very boring, Rourke manages to make this motivation work by just how sleazy he is. He's not as theatrical or emotional as other Disney villains that we're used to. There's a calm coldness to him that we don't really see broken until his final moments. At one point, one of the characters even says that nothing surprises him. And that's very true up until he's being consumed by the very thing he was trying to profit off of. Everything backfires on Rourke in beautiful fashion. His propensity to betray everyone leads to Helga getting revenge on him by blowing up his balloon.
Nothing personal!
Nothing personal.
And then Milo, another protagonist who gets his hands dirty by the way, slices him with a crystal before he gets chopped up by the propellers. It's pretty damn violent, but it really stuck with me ever since childhood for two reasons. First is the persistence of Rourke. Even after becoming fully crystallized, he tries to get Milo, which is terrifying. And secondly, it's that weird, distorted, high-pitched scream that comes out of him as he gets consumed. I've never forgotten this one, just like I'll never forget this awesome movie. So, having gone through all of these scenes, you're probably wondering what my favorite Disney villain death of all time is. No, you're probably not. It's pretty obvious by now, but there is a good reason for it being the finale here. The death of this character not only traumatized several kids, left a big impression on adults, and is undoubtedly the most violent off-screen death of the entire Disney Renaissance, it also does something entirely unique, even in comparison to Rourke getting crystallized. The death of Clayton from Tarzan actually elevates the character himself. What I mean here is Clayton, outside of his final scenes, is kinda generic. He's got some good lines here and there, I like his design, and Brian Blessed is always a treat, but as a character, he doesn't do a whole lot. It's obvious what he's up to, but he's nowhere near as fun as Rourke to be this simple. Overall, for the majority of the runtime of Tarzan, I could take or leave Clayton. That is, until the climax. In his final moments, Clayton fulfills his narrative purpose by becoming the very violent, unintelligent animal that he claims Tarzan is the entire movie. He challenges Tarzan's humanity by asserting that violence, killing, is an inherent trait, whereas Tarzan, by destroying his gun, shows how much more human he has become. He defeats Clayton through intelligence, not in a full-on fight, keeping his distance and keeping calm, whereas Clayton snarls, grunts, and violently thrashes about like an animal. And what seals his fate, the moment you've all been waiting for, is when he carelessly cuts the vines until only one is left wrapped around his throat. Tarzan, again showing his humanity, tries to help him by warning him, but Clayton doesn't listen. There's so much about this scene that makes it so shocking, so disturbing. For one, there's the pacing. It's not enough that Clayton drops and it's over quick. They add all of these shots of him realizing that he's screwed, grabbing desperately at the vine to no avail. The horrified look on his face here is burned into my mind. And talk about getting around showing somebody hanging. I think the shadow that some people still haven't noticed, by the way, is very effective, leaving us to imagine what Tarzan is seeing here. But if there's one element that makes this whole thing gruesomely come together, it's Brian Blessed. That final scream is just so genuine. I don't know where that came from. What I would pay to see footage of him in the booth recording that. All of it comes together in a perfect sequence. The scene that reminds me just how effective it can be when Disney villains die. But as always, that's just how I feel. I'm sure there's tons of other deaths that I didn't talk about that were direct to DVD, direct to video, or whatever. I just didn't want to make this video hours long. If you have a favorite Disney villain death you'd like to elaborate on, or one that I didn't talk about, or one that you disagree with, please let me know down in the comments below. My camera died, so this is just going to be voiceover Mason here at the end. If you would like to support me, you can subscribe to the channel, check out some of my previous videos, like the video, or if you want to support me directly, you can join my Patreon, where you'll get access to my videos early, access to my Discord where you can talk to me directly, and you can be listed at the end of this video as one of my producers. And you can even join my executive producer patrons, Lapis Lazuli VA, Lizard Gang, and JoJo. All of your support makes these videos possible. Thank you so much for watching my video. Whether you support or not, I really appreciate it. I absolutely love that I get to share how I feel about film with all of you. Thank you for always watching my videos. Thank you for subscribing. It is crazy that I have 30,000 people that watch me. That's just nuts. I can't wait to see you in the next video. Take care of yourselves. You're all lovely. You're all worth it. Have a great day.